Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Monday. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, Mike Brown is reportedly off the board. He'll take the job in Sacramento. That's one guy on the Lakers list. Where do they turn to next?
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, sometimes on weekends, no matter how you get your podcasts, where you get your podcasts. We get this podcast up for you bright and early, so you always have it there available for you. And the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel features the video version, so you can drink all of this in. Andy, Mike Brown. He was a name that we were both kind of intrigued by like there's more than two of us. We were all intrigued by Mike Brown. And he, over the weekend, it has been reported will be offered the job in Sacramento. So one guy off the board. Your thoughts on losing out on Mike Brown?
Mostly I'm just happy for Mike Brown that he's getting another opportunity. I mean, it never felt to me like he was that directly linked to the Lakers and that it was that big of a possibility that he'd end up getting this job in the first place. So we covered Mike Brown when he was the coach of the Lakers, and it was obviously a pretty tumultuous, pretty disastrous stint, but we both liked him a lot as a person. And both really respected him as somebody who not just works hard. I mean, to be totally honest, for this job, I actually think he worked too hard. I think he actually would have been better off if he had relaxed a little bit and not quite,
chill. There was a little chill that needed to be in there. Yeah.
But he's had a lot of time on a really good Warriors staff. And I would not be surprised at all if he's learned some lessons from this period. I know somebody that covers the Warriors, or at least has been around the Warriors a lot, if not day to day. Unsolicited a couple of years ago, we were just talking about this with Mike Brown, not even connected to the Lakers. And this person told me that they thought actually Mike Brown was far better equipped to be an NBA head coach than he was for the Lakers. So I'm really interested to see how this turns out for him, just because, again, I like Mike a lot as a person. And in the meantime, my God, Sacramento may be the only team that needs to land on a damn coach more than the Lakers in terms of trying to create stability.
I want to mention that. I want to talk about that in a few minutes here, because I think there's some interesting stuff and some reporting that came out of this. Warren Legere, the sort of agent for everyone among coaches, represents a ton of coaches, actually put out a statement heading into the weekend that Mike Brown would take the job if he was offered. Which is crazy, as our friend Harrison Fagan pointed out, and Mark Stein noted in his newsletter. Like, that never happens, where like the agent has to say, yes, if he is offered the job, he'll take it. The presumption being it's the Kings. Are you sure you want that gig? And as some of the, there's some stuff I want to get into regarding the Lakers that kind of reminds me a little bit of that. Mike Brown, to me, was one of the most interesting guys from the quote unquote, the recycling pile. These guys that have had experiences, they've been fired, and people always kind of roll their eyes at these guys.
Oh, he's a retread.
I think because there's no question he's a retread, but like, it's a different kind of deal, because you look. I mean,
he's been the head coach of the Cavaliers twice.
Twice.
It's a fair amount of recycling.
He's retreaded in one place. He's
yes,
and
exactly.
Obviously with the Lakers and all that, but he's still, like we talked about Sam Cassell as a really interesting name that the Lakers might want to consider. It ticks a lot of boxes, especially for a guy who's never been an NBA head coach. Mike Brown, for all of the treading, is younger than Sam Cassell. He's, I think, 52. And so there's a lot of growth that you could still have. He could be your coach for a decade, if things work out. He's still plenty young enough for that. And as the Lakers go through their candidate list, and there's a ton of guys on it. There are the Terry Stottses of the world the Lakers have interviewed. We're going to maybe mention him a little bit in today's show and try to get a little bit of intel over the course of the week about Stotts and what would make him a good or a bad fit here. And, there's always the intrigue of the new guys. But, I mean, when was Mike Brown let go? But when was Mike Brown done with his last head coaching gig? It's been like 7 years, 6, 7 years. I forget. But, like, that's a lot of time. And you get all the assistant time. And you got to, like, he's a totally different coach now, I would think, than he was before. And I think, Frank Vogel, part of what made him, I guess, at least a decent story when the Lakers hired him, despite being the 12th choice, was the idea of how much he learned by his failure in Orlando. So, at least from my perspective, Andy, it is sort of that Mike Brown was that reminder to me to try to think of context and have an open mind and understand that failure or success in previous stints is not automatically an indicator of what might happen in LA.
Yeah, and then in the meantime, though, what makes this really intriguing for the Lakers with Mike Brown off the board to whatever degree you think he was on the board for the Lakers is Mark Jackson had been heavily rumored to be the front runner for the Kings job. And he has also interviewed formally with the Lakers. Does this now make Mark Jackson, who, for some clarification, because he used to be a Clutch client, but it turns out, like I just recently learned this. I thought he still was. He's actually no longer represented, according to Mark Stein, by Clutch. So that doesn't necessarily mean that he couldn't end up getting hired for this job, but the idea that he was represented by
right, because it
Clutch
was one of the ties. It was one of the things that tied him to the current regime. I mean, like now does that? I think Lakers fans were hoping he would get hired by the Kings so that he couldn't be hired by the Lakers.
They weren't just hoping. They were doing like an email writing campaign to the Kings front office under fake names as Kings fans. This was something Laker fans desperately wanted because the temperature that I've taken in the Lakers sphere, whether you're talking about on the YouTube page comments for Locked On Lakers or on Twitter at Cam Brothers, we both pop on ESPN radio now and then in LA. He is not a popular choice among Laker Nation.
As I like to say, Andy, using his standard catchphrase, "Mama, there goes that man you should not hire." And there's a really interesting nugget here about who wanted Mark Jackson and who didn't want Mark Jackson in the Kings organization. And eventually, obviously, we saw who won out because they're going to hire Mike Brown. And I kind of want to go through that next because it says a lot about Jackson's candidacy. So we'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including the NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, and Major League Baseball, which is in full swing. Also, this is fun. You can bet on who will get drafted number one overall in the upcoming NBA draft. The favorite right now is currently Jabari Smith. Brian, not to be confused with the Jabari Smith who actually played in the NBA in the early 2000s. I'm not saying, Brian, that I don't follow college basketball. But when I looked this up, I actually thought it was a typo on the betonline.net site. It turns out Jabari Smith, he's a junior. He's actually the Jabari Smith I was thinking of. That's his kid. Like, who knew besides everyone? I think everybody knew this.
Congratulations to Pops.
Yeah,
I am not a devoted fan of college basketball. So
no, I thought this was a typo. Bet Online, your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device. Learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts.
I recommend everybody, and I know you do too, Andy. We've reached a point in the world where everything costs money. Everybody's got their own Substack. Everybody's got their own newsletter, and a lot. You cannot subscribe to everything. if you have to make choices, I certainly recommend Mark Stein as a guy
yeah.
to subscribe to. You will always learn a lot from the newsletter. Great reporting, good analysis, not hot takey. And Mark's just a really solid guy. So like, I know both of us subscribe to that particular newsletter. He had in it that Mike Brown was, or I'm sorry, Jackson, we were talking about, was supported by owner Vivek Ranadive. The basketball guys, Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox, who eventually obviously won this argument, and he wanted Mike Brown. I don't mean to disparage the ownership of the Sacramento Kings, Andy, but if Vivek wants to hire Mark Jackson, that makes me want to hire him even less, because his track record of decision making in Sacramento is god awful. And so if he likes that guy, that makes me not like that guy. And I didn't like that guy that much anyway.
Well, Brian, then you better have a conversation with LeBron, because LeBron is supposedly the guy that really wants Mark Jackson. I mean, from all the reporting that's come out about this, and I think some of this was fueled by the perception that Mark Jackson was still a clutch client, but by multiple reports, the driving force, if there is one, for Mark Jackson with the Lakers is actually LeBron, as opposed to Rob Pelinka or the Rambi or Jeannie Buss being the people most intrigued or enamored by Jackson. It's actually LeBron. So, which actually is a pretty fascinating, paradox, because Vivek Ranadive is not considered a sharp basketball mind among owners.
No,
like he's not. He's considered, if anything, somebody who thinks he's like a basketball genius. In reality,
he's a perfect example of the principle of just because you are good at one thing. And Vivek Ranadive is undoubtedly an excellent businessman. He's made himself enough money to buy the Sacramento Kings. Very bright guy. You can call me a forward thinker. That doesn't mean you're good at owning a basketball team, or more importantly, good at running one, which is what he tries to do. So yeah, I agree.
Right. But in the meantime, though, LeBron James is one of the smartest basketball minds this game has ever seen. And he loves, reportedly, Mark Jackson as a coach, which means one of two things. Either LeBron understands something that you, me, and pretty much everybody but Vivek doesn't get, or it speaks to the idea that I know we've talked about over the years, that in the end, I'm not sure how much LeBron really cares about his coach one way or the other. Like, he may be really into somebody at the outset, but after a while, I think LeBron probably figures out, you know what, I'm kind of the guy coaching this team anyway.
I wonder too.
What does it matter?
Yeah, look, it's really hard to know what exactly LeBron, approves of Mark Jackson, exactly what that means. I do wonder how much Mark Jackson and LeBron have sat down and talked about coaching, or what Jackson would do if he was LeBron's coach, or how he would do stuff and this and that. I'm sure LeBron deeply respects Mark Jackson as the career he had, and probably I'm sure he listens to him all the time on TV. LeBron watches more basketball than anybody. The good news here, if you're a Lakers fan, because GM LeBron has shown himself not always to be a great decision maker. Kobe Bryant, one of the great basketball minds of our day, also not necessarily a great GM. If you're worried that the Lakers, look what they did, they wouldn't say no to LeBron when they went and hired when they made the Westbrook trade. We do have evidence, Andy, that they will not just do what LeBron says when it comes to coaching hires. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because Ty Lue would be the head coach with 2 years left on his contract, and the Lakers wouldn't be firing him.
This, though, in thinking about the reported connection between LeBron and Mark Jackson, and LeBron being the guy that we know associated with the Lakers so far is most interested in Mark Jackson. We've talked about him before. I find him a hard guy to evaluate as a candidate, really trying to do it in earnest, honestly, because it's well established Mark Jackson napalmed his way out of Golden State, and he left that organization on extremely bad terms. He reportedly was very, very difficult to get along with. To be fair to him,
his players liked him, but the rest of the organization didn't. The locker room liked him.
Yeah,
everyone else did.
And to be fair to Mark Jackson, though, as much as the championships happened immediately after his firing and being replaced by Steve Kerr, they did improve really dramatically in a short amount of time under Mark Jackson. And, he laid a foundation that Steve Kerr, who is considered widely one of the best coaches in the league, was able to take that much further and turn into, a mini dynasty of sorts. But, it's important to acknowledge the success that Jackson had. And I think some of the impressions that at least I know I have of Jackson, it's shaped a lot by his basketball commentary, which, full disclosure, I'm not a big fan of his style, but I also think he is playing a persona in a character to a very large degree. I think him and Van Gundy both do this. So at times I'm genuinely unsure as to how much of his commentary reflects his true worldview of the game, which often seems antiquated in 2022, versus he's just playing Mark Jackson, old school broadcaster. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know if there's a separation at all, but there are times when I wonder. But either way,
I think that you make that disclaimer though is really important. It's also really I suspect that many people who don't like Jackson as a candidate are shaped by listening to him on weekends. And that is not, like you said, that's just not fair. I look back at his tenure in Golden State and some of the reporting that's come out since then. It's just like I'd be uncomfortable putting somebody who failed because of that into this organization where there is just all kinds of chaos and weirdness, and it's a small family, and like it's not a good idea. But the disclaimer that you have is absolutely true for me too. I also has a really thin record. I mean, he only coached for 3 years, so it's like you can't even look at that and say like he was this dominant whatever and X, Y, and Z. It's not where I would go.
Okay. Coming up, though, before we shift off Mark Jackson to another hypothetical that we just wanted to toss around because there was an interesting commentary from a Laker free agent to be about his desire to return to the team. There's one more point, though, that I want to bring up about Mark Jackson if the Lakers were to hire him. So we'll get into that next. But first, Brian, Locked on Lakers, it's brought to you by Built Bar. The summer, it's approaching. You got parties to hit. Your kids are going to be in camp. You're going to be running all over the place. You're going to want some food on the go. And Built Bars, they are the perfect snack for the family vacations. Just throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. Make sure everybody has that bar so they can be fueled for the summer adventures. They're healthy. They're delicious. All Built Bars and Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means you can eat healthy, but actually enjoy doing it. If you have not tried the Puffs yet, the protein-infused marshmallows, you are missing out because they come in awesome flavors like banana cream pie and even churro. Like, who would not want a protein bar that tastes like a churro, except the churro industry, because it's going to go out of business because these Puffs are so incredible. And you can order a mixed box, which comes with 12 flavors of bars and Puffs. Really cool ones like banana cream pie, raspberry double chocolate. Most Built Bars, just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, but 17 grams of protein. You compare that to a candy bar that usually it's like 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, like dozens of net carbs. And don't even get me started, Brian, on how bad a churro is for you. I mean, that's just straight sugar. Use the promo code LOCK15. Get 15% off your order, you idiot. Brian the idiot, not you listening. LOCK15 is the promo code, 15% off at built.com. If the Lakers do end up hiring Mark Jackson, unless they have been enamored with him, like from afar, watching him in the ESPN booth for years, they better damn well get LeBron's commitment for an extension. And like, I say this as somebody who isn't even convinced that extending LeBron is a great idea to begin with. But if you hire LeBron's dude who has not coached since 2014 and napalmed his way, again, out of what became the most successful franchise in the NBA since his exit, not that it's all his fault, but you get my point, without a long-term commitment from LeBron, that's just crappy business, man. Like at that point, you might as well just fire Pelinka and like formally hire either Rich Paul or Maverick Carter or Randy Mims to run the organization. Like if you
Or
are
pay off
hiring
the
Mark,
bet that I put in with Bet Online about LeBron James's player coach, which I believe was 150 to 1 or something like that. And then we all win.
yeah, I mean, seriously, like if they hire Mark Jackson without getting that commitment from LeBron, again, unless they just think he is the best candidate, period, out on the market, that's just dumb.
Yeah, it gets to, when we spoke last week, 2-part episode with Kevin Arnovitz at ESPN, and go back and listen to him talk about Darvin Ham, who was, still very much in the conversation with the Lakers. And one of his points was that Darvin is a guy who you can plug and play into any situation, which means he could come in and coach LeBron and an AD-led team with championship aspirations, whatever, and probably be well equipped to coach the team that if it doesn't work and you have to, rip it up and start over with, a true rebuild, he could probably coach that too. You have to have somebody, well, in theory at least, you have to have somebody who can kind of do both of those things because of just where they are, or at the very least coach multiple kinds of championship caliber teams. But that gets me to the tweet that I saw here, Andy, because I think it's an interesting question at the very least. I'm not even sure you've seen it, but I want to put it out to you. So you tweeted today, happy for Mike Brown to get another shot, hardworking guy, beyond what he brings to the table defensively. One of the replies to that tweet was from Norm Karnick, who's a frequent commenter on our Twitter feed at Cam Brothers, responding at good hire, responding to us, good hire. Odd compliment to Sacramento, but I wish Brown the best. Seems to have earned another slot, or a shot, I should say. Here's the question, though. I feel like the Lakers have this backwards. They need to know what they will be next season before picking a coach. Obviously, Andy, the Lakers are trying to get their guy before free agency begins, before the trade season begins. They're not going to wait until June, probably, to get this done. But it is kind of an interesting question. Like, they are picking the coach before they can know exactly what kind of team they're going to be able to put around the coach. I mean, would there be value? They're not competing against anybody. Would there be value to building the team and then hiring the coach?
I mean, you never know who else could have vacancies. Like, there's always rumors that Doc Rivers could get fired by the Sixers.
Right, but part of the reason the Lakers are going slow is in part maybe seeing if Doc gets fired, because then they would at least find out if Doc wants the job. So
sure, but in theory,
you're right. Then Philly has an opening.
Right, Philly has an opening, and in theory, Doc doesn't say yes, or Doc takes a year off, or whatever. Like, or Doc gets hired by Charlotte. You know what I mean? Like, you could always end up losing the guy, is my point.
Sure.
It would be a long, you're also going to have a difficult time getting free agents if they don't know who their coach is.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think, I understand where Norm is coming from, and he is correct that it puts the Lakers in a bind, at least trying to figure out exactly what they want in a coach. Although, if it makes anybody feel better, they never know what they want in a coach anyway. So in that sense, not much to figure out.
I think, I mean, I get what he's getting at. I think what you do is you pick the coach that you're comfortable with, and you pick the coach that plays in a way that you would like to play. And then, unlike what you did for Frank Vogel this year, actually provide that kind of roster. And I don't even know if we can get into the Westbrook rabbit hole for this conversation in this show. Maybe it comes up again over the course of the week. But like, if you hire Terry Stotts because you want your team to have a certain personality offensively, because that's sort of his specialty. And he was a successful NBA coach, and he 8 straight playoff seasons and all that. You can try at least to marry your free agent acquisitions, whatever trade you might make with THT or Kendrick Nunn or Westbrook, to this new coach. It may not work because they have so few assets to do it with, but I think that probably is the way to do it, that gets to what Norm is talking about, which is you need to figure out what kind of team you have before hiring the coach. I don't think they have that luxury, but you could at least know what you want once you hire the coach and try to go get it. That seems to be the best way to do it.
Again, it speaks to the thing I always get to with this organization, is that I'm not sure they really know what they want in a coach, in part because I don't think they have consistently cared about what they would get from a coach since Phil. It's led to this revolving door coach, but it's also led to a revolving door with identities in terms of the type of teams that they've had out on the floor, the type of players that they've gone for. And they need to hire who they think is the best candidate out there. Because if that guy is good, he can figure out a way to work with LeBron and AD and whatever else is out there. And like you said, just figure out what this coach's wheelhouse is and just do your best to match that that framework. But again, just figure out what you actually want. Think about it in terms of, if we could get a guy who's actually here 5-7 years, I know it's a crazy concept, like, who do we picture as that guy?
Somebody who will take 6 year-to-year extensions is apparently who they want. Let me ask you one more question, and maybe we'll save the free agent talk for later in the week. Part of the reason the Lakers are reportedly going slow is, that they want to at least see what happens with Quinn Snyder. They at least want to see what happens with Doc Rivers. And this ties back to Mike Brown and that report that I mentioned of Warren Legary actually saying out loud, yes, my guy will take the job if he's offered it, because again, it reflects it's the Kings. It's a terrible job for coaches. We both have expressed our reservations about how good of a job this is to the marquee names, whether or not we really think Quinn Snyder would leave the Jazz to take this job, that Doc Rivers would, if he was let go in Philadelphia, or even if he's not and it's really rocky, would still want to leave that job and come here. Is it worth the trouble, do you think, to wait to find out what happens with these guys, if they're at all interested, to at least get them to tell them that they're not interested? Or, because I can see the potential for bad there too. You don't want to necessarily open yourself up, or we waited for Quinn Snyder, Quinn Snyder doesn't want to come here. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not a great look either.
I mean, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with targeting a guy if they really think Quinn Snyder is an excellent coach. If they think Quinn Snyder is the best candidate out there, and through the back channeling that, God, I hope they're doing, they have an idea that he would be at least relatively interested in the job, at least somewhat interested, I don't see the harm. I mean, who are you missing out on?
Like, I think if they have that intel, if they have that,
it's only going to blow up. It's only going to blow up if Quinn Snyder leaves the Jazz and takes the Charlotte job, I guess.
It was something that I thought about that got my attention, especially with that report about Legary going out publicly talking about the job, and given what we've talked about with the Lakers job relative to others. All right, so more names will be coming out. We're going to try to set up some scouting reports on some of the Terry. We're going to try to get some info on Terry Stotts and some other of these coaches that they are talking to, from guys who are a little bit closer to those dudes than we are. And we'll talk about free agency. We've got some other fun things planned for everybody. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you get the podcast early. Make sure you're subscribing there. We'll see everybody Tuesday.